Welcome, everyone. I have 2 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. Uh, Today, we're here for the webinar, When All Means All, Serving Rainbow Families in Your Library. And I'm Caroline Smith, the Inclusive Services Consultant here at the South Carolina State Library. And I do want to acknowledge our funding. Today's webinar is made possible in part by a Library Services and Technology Act grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which is administered by us, the South Carolina State Library. And along with that, you will all receive a link to a survey after this webinar. And we really want to get your feedback so that we can turn that into our funding source. And that will help ensure that programs like this stay free for library staff. A few housekeeping things before we start. This webinar is being recorded and you'll receive an email with a link to that recording within the next day or so. And feel free to ask questions in the chat. You are able to unmute yourself as well, but I may mute you if I hear any background noise. And we have some time reserved at the end, I believe, for question and answers. We also do have automatic closed captioning available. If you would like to view that during the session, you would go down to the bottom of your Zoom window and click on either the More button or the CC button, and you can choose Show Subtitles or View Transcript. And now I'll introduce our guest presenter today. We're very grateful to have Dr. Jamie Campbell Naidu. He is the Foster EBSCO Endowed Professor at the University of Alabama School of Library and Information Science or Studies, where he teaches and researches in the area of diversity in children's books and library services to diverse populations. He has published numerous books and articles related to diversity in youth services, LGBTQ plus children's literature, Latinx children's literature, and library services to rainbow families. He is past president of the Association for Library Service to Children and has served on numerous Children's Book Award committees. And here we also know that some of us had the chance to take your courses when you taught at the University of South Carolina as well. So welcome, Jamie. I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. So I'll keep my camera on just for a few minutes, and I'm actually going to turn my camera off because I'd rather you look at the content on the screen versus me. Yes, when all meets all, serving rainbow families in your library. Today, we're going to talk about a wide variety of topics related to serving what I'm going to call rainbow families: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning, intersex, asexual, pansexual, plus. Families. I'm going to use the term rainbow, mainly just for the sake of ease when we're talking today. But we're going to talk a little bit, starting out actually talking about understanding terminology. We'll talk about the information needs of this population, the diversity within this population, the importance of finding materials, the findability of them, the patrons that are rainbow finding materials, how to create welcoming spaces and environments. I'll give you some recommendations for collection development, some suggestions for evaluating materials, talk a little bit about programming, give you some recommendations, and then I have a handout, a 6-page handout that accompanies this webinar, which has a lot more resources. So anything that you'll mention today in the PowerPoint is available on that handout. All right, so I'm going to actually turn my camera off because I have a very short clip that I want to show you to kind of get us to thinking about the patrons that we serve.
Dear 29-year-old Morgan.
Dear 28-year-old AJ.
Dear 22-year-old Charlie.
Probably look and sound very different right now.
One thing you always need to remember is to stay positive.
Just do what makes you happy.
Really hope you found a job and a place to stay.
I'm still performing, making art, making work that I'm proud of.
And not be a bum, please.
And not compromising on my values.
I hope you're in a good place, because honestly, I can't wait until I'm 27 and I'm done with all this teenager garbage.
Dear 29-year-old Quinn.
Dear 29-year-old Catherine. Dear 28-year-old Lucy.
I hope that your father has come around and is very, very supportive of you.
Will you ever get there to the point where you're real and everywhere in the hearts of your parents in the hearts of yourself.
Just be happy, please, because I'm miserable right now.
I just wanted to let you know that you're awesome and I love you.
And I hope that you can look in the mirror and finally be happy with who you are and have people who are happy with who you are too.
And just believe in yourself and you're gonna do great. And I love you so much. Love.
All right, so that kind of gives you an idea of this is one segment of the population that you could be serving. And I always get so emotional whenever I see this video because it just, you know, one, it shows the diversity of the population that we're going to be serving, but it also shows how much members of this population, they want to be accepted, they want to feel welcomed. And sometimes society doesn't give us the opportunity to feel accepted, to feel welcome. So these were transgender teens speaking to themselves in 10 years, kind of giving themselves a pep talk and hoping that things get better. And you as the library can help in that process by providing welcoming services and providing welcoming collections and providing a safe space, and not only for trans teens, but other members of the rainbow community. So starting out with, there's a lot of different terminology to describe various members of the LGBTQIA plus community. We're not going to go over all the different terms today, but I wanted to make sure you have resources to know where to go. Now, I have played around on the South Carolina State Library website, and I do know you have at least one resource up there on the State Library page that does have links to definitions of different members of the rainbow community. But welcoming schools.org is a great place to go if you're looking for information about programs, collections, and then also for terminology. So they have a several page handout. This is just a screen capture of a few of the pages. A several page handout for adults that defines various terminology. And what do we mean when we say genderqueer? What do we mean when we say asexual or bisexual or lesbian or gay, or when we talk about gender expression? They also have on their website over here on the left, they have terminology for kids. So takes those same, many of those same terms, but then puts them in kid-friendly language, so that when we are working with our younger patrons, we can use language that they understand. The Trans Student Education Resources also, their website has a lot of great material on it, and we'll talk more about it and the things that they have on the next slide. But I just wanted to also call out, they also have recommendations of definitions and that you can also turn to if you are, again, thinking about using the correct terminology and then how to better understand different segments of this population, because the rainbow population is changing and it's growing in terms of how different members define themselves and as newer understanding informs our understanding of this population. So I mentioned the Trans Student Education Resources, and so a really great resource on their website is the Gender Unicorn that helps to kind of explain the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity, gender expression, and really helps to visualize and conceptualize what is the difference between when someone's attracted to someone, but then also how they decide to express themselves in terms of their gender and their gender identity. A great resource for kids is Reflection Press. Reflection Press is a queer-owned children's book publisher. Maya Cristina Gonzalez runs that with her partner. She is a Latinx children's book creator. And this whole website for Reflection Press, she produces books that and activities and games, hands-on games and things like that. It helps kids explore the different pronouns and different gender expressions. And so it's all definitely in kid-friendly language. So again, if you're just thinking about how to have conversations and understand this population, using terms that are correct and using terms that are correct with kids is a great first place to start. So what makes a rainbow family? So I use the term rainbow family throughout this presentation. So rainbow family is an all-encompassing phrase. It could be singled or partnered LGBTQ plus parents or caregivers. A rainbow family can include children and teens that that have a LGBTQ plus parent or caregiver, or children or teens themselves that identify as LGBTQ plus. It could be children or teens or adults and families that identify as gender nonconforming, that have diverse gender expressions. And it also could be extended family members as well. So aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins, et cetera, that kind of fall into this category. So LGBTQ relatives that identify as various segments of this population. But why rainbow families? Why talk about library services just specifically to this population? Well, as of 2020, there are over 140,000 same-sex couples that are raising kids and teens in almost every county in the United States. And that's approximately 15% of the 1.1 million same-sex couples in the US. So about 15% of all the couples in the US that are same-sex have kids. Now, this is information that was reported from the US Census Bureau. That only takes into account same-sex couples. That does not take into account couples that are on other identities within the rainbow community that would not be captured within the US Census data. So this number is actually much larger. But if you're looking just in general at same-sex families with kids, and also kind of how this could potentially relate to other members of the LGBTQIA plus community that are families, they generally live in areas with low numbers of same-sex couples and LGBTQ singles without kids. Now, what this means is that oftentimes rainbow families are in rural areas and they're in suburban areas. So even your community, wherever you are, you might say, well, I'm in rural South Carolina and we don't have families like that. I bet you do. You just may not know that those families are there. You might, again, I live in a suburban area. I haven't seen these families. Well, they're probably there. They just may not be out. And we'll talk about that on the next slide or two. Also, if you're thinking about where these families are, or who these families are, they are often a lot more racially and ethnically diverse. And there are a lot more interracial couples in rainbow families when compared to traditional heterosexual families. So these families are very diverse. There's lots of intersectionality there. They live in oftentimes rural or suburban areas. And they're in almost every community there is in the United States. Also, between 2 and 3.7 million kids under the age 18 are raised by rainbow families. So there are a lot of rainbow families and a lot of kids being raised by rainbow families, whether or not you're able to readily identify them. Thinking specifically about rainbow teens, there are some things to think about with them. Over 40% of rainbow teens report being victims of violence. They are over 50% are homeless. They are twice as likely to have attempted suicide, and some of them have succeeded because of harassment at school. Over 40% of rainbow teens drop out of school. They are more likely to engage in risky and dangerous behaviors because they are not feeling welcome and accepted in their own families, perhaps, or in their school environments, or in other places in the community. They may put themselves in dangerous situations in an attempt to find acceptance or to find escape from their current realities. And then you can also see there, there's a percentage there related to prostitution as well. And then specifically looking at LGBTQ teens of color, they experience a lot more violence than their white peers, their white rainbow peers. So as you can see, there's a potential for a lot of trauma and a lot of emotions that are going on with these teens, more so than other groups of teens. It's also important to think about when you are serving this population that there is a lot of diversity within rainbow families. Like any population, whatever program you plan or collections, there's not going to be a one size fits all. Certain cultures are less accepting of LGBTQ plus individuals, such as the Latinx community or African American community or Muslim community. Now, granted, that doesn't mean that you won't find members of any of those communities that are accepting. You will find people in those communities that are accepting, but in general, those communities are less accepting of rainbow individuals within their own community. Rainbow families have different levels of being out to themselves, out to family, friends, and the larger community. And this is important to think about when you're planning programs and when you're planning collections and when you're making displays. And we'll talk more about this later, but sometimes as librarians, we think we're doing a good thing and, oh, wow, we're doing this targeted program, or we're doing these targeted collections or targeted displays, when in reality, they're actually creating uncomfortable situations for some of our patrons, and they may not be accessing and taking advantage of the resources that we have, the collections that we have, or the programs that we have, because they're not out yet and they don't want to be outed by the library. There's generational differences within the rainbow community. Younger generations are generally much more open about gender expression and sexual orientation than older generations. Again, that there are exceptions to that, but just in general. It's also important to remember that within rainbow communities, just like in any other community, there are instances of racism, sexism, and I'll add ableism in there too. There's transphobia that is prominent within the rainbow community, as well as socioeconomic disparities. Sometimes people think about rainbow families, particularly those that have kids, and they think about, oh, well, you just have these adults that are making really high incomes and they're raising kids, so they're better off than heterosexual families. Some people think that. That's not the case with all rainbow families. And in some cases, they are much more disadvantaged depending on who the caregivers are that are raising these kids. There are, again, within the rainbow community, there is a large spectrum between what I call radical activists that are, very much in support of everyone, being welcoming rainbow or LGBT queer rights. And they're really out and proud. And that goes all the way to the other end of the spectrum to the individuals that are under the radar. And you can have a family where maybe one caregiver is under the radar, and the other one might not be. Or the parents are out, but the kids are under the radar. So it really does depend on individual families. And so it's important, just like with any other community, to know who's in your community, know what families are there. If any of you have done anything with diverse literature, I'm sure you've heard the phrase by Dr. Rosine Bishop, where she talks about books serving as mirrors or books serving as windows, mirrors that reflect our own culture or windows into someone else's culture. And that's very much true for the importance of kids and rainbow families seeing themselves represented, seeing themselves and their caregivers and their just families represented. It's extremely important. And there's a lot of great literature out there and a lot of great literature being published as each year goes by. In fact, there are many more books now with trans characters, even for kids and for teens, than there were just a few years ago. The book Alex Gino, Rick over here on the left, is the first kids book with an asexual character. If You Could Be Mine is a book that's set in a very religiously conservative community, and it's about a lesbian couple. So there are lots of different diverse stories and diverse voices within the rainbow community, and fortunately, there are a lot more diverse stories being printed and published about them. So I'm going to talk later today about where can you find some of these diverse stories. But first, I want to talk about the needs of rainbow families. So rainbow families, like any other patron, they want and they deserve developmentally appropriate, high quality print and digital materials. In this case, in addition to just in general digital high quality materials that normalize their experiences, that make them seem like any other member of your community. It's also important for rainbow families to have current and accurate information about local organizations. If there's any local organizations geared toward rainbow teens or rainbow families, or rainbow, other segments of the LGBTQ plus population, it's important to know about that and have that information available at the library or posted on your library website so that your patrons can connect with those organizations and associations. Because the public library, the whole purpose of the public library is to be the welcome mat of the community, to really bring people together, provide opportunities to connect on thoughts and ideas. And so providing opportunities for rainbow families to connect with LGBTQ plus organizations in the community is a great way to do that. Rainbow families also deserve unfiltered access to materials, to online communities, information, and social websites. And I underline unfiltered access because sometimes in public libraries, particularly with the filtering software that we have, we can unintentionally prevent that access. And we can unintentionally provide, provide barriers for rainbow families trying to find information. Oftentimes, public library software is filtering software is such that if you have lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, asexual, any transsexual, any word or any separate segment of the LGBTQ plus population, you take any of those words and type them in separately, they're going to be blocked by filtering software. Now, the libraries that I've worked in the past, there was the option to override that software, but then the patrons had to ask you to override that, which could also create an uncomfortable situation. So that's just something to keep in mind. Maybe you have no control over that, but sometimes filtering software can prevent access to that. So you might want to think about, well, having bookmarks or other information or parts of your website that have links to places where people can go on and find at home. When they're at home, they can go and find information where there's no filtering software. Inclusive language and library programming for any age group is important. When thinking about rainbow families, thinking about pronoun usage, you want to be respectful of a person's pronouns. Do not assume pronouns, but ask them, what are your pronouns? When you're thinking about language and programming too, don't, try to avoid saying to kids, well, bring your dad to our Father's Day celebration. Well, kids might not have a dad. Or bring your mom to Mother's Day. Well, kids might not have a mom. So just thinking about the language that you use in programming, and just something when you're giving directions or just talking to families, sometimes the language you can use can create an unwelcoming environment. So think about pronoun uses, not just in the words that you use, but then also how it's used in policies, and promotional flyers and things like that. Going back to the trans student education resources, they have a great little chart there that has gender pronouns and how to use those and examples of using them. I like the example on the far left of this library in Illinois, where at the desk, they have a little sign that just says, ask me about my pronouns. Having a little sign like that just sends a message that you are welcome to having a conversation with someone about what their pronouns are, but it also says that you are welcoming to rainbow families. There are a lot of great suggestions and other ideas of creating welcoming spaces for rainbow families. We'll talk more about them today, but I also wanted to draw your attention to this resource from the Rainbow Roundtable called Open to All, Serving the GLBT Community in Your Library. And they give a lot of considerations and things to think about when creating a welcoming space for rainbow families. What are some other needs? So gender neutral bathrooms. Gender neutral bathrooms, one, create a safe space, a welcoming space for trans individuals, but also they just help prevent those long lines to the bathroom. In Europe, they have gender neutral bathrooms. They just have, a common space for everybody to wash their hands, but then everybody goes and does their own business in their separate bathroom, wherever they need to go behind the door, and then they come out and wash their hands. Gender neutral bathrooms are great because I'm sure we've all been to a conference before where there's a extremely long line for your bathroom, but the other bathroom doesn't have anybody waiting in line, and you want to sneak over there, but you're worried about the social norms and the evil eyes and sneaky looks that you'll get from people if you dare do that. So having gender neutral bathrooms create opportunities for anybody to do their business when they need to. And it creates a welcoming space, but then also helps everyone out. And contrary to what some people will say, they do not lead to sexual promiscuity, having a gender neutral bathroom, any more so than having a regular bathrooms that are traditional male and female bathrooms. Gender neutral bathrooms do not lead to any more inappropriate behaviors than the traditional bathrooms. Other things to think about. Rainbow families need opportunities in inclusive programs and displays to see their culture and their lives represented. So if you have a display about families in the kids department, include some books that have rainbow families in them. Or if you're doing a Black History Month display, Then include some books that are about LGBTQ plus African Americans. Also, just related to that, when you're thinking about programming, just as with Black History Month or Asian Pacific, Islander Heritage Month, you celebrate these books all throughout the year. You may have one month where you promote the books through displays, but then you promote these in programs throughout the year. You should be doing the same thing with materials about rainbow families, using them throughout the years. Confidentiality is extremely important when serving rainbow families, confidentiality of records, because you might have, again, individuals within the rainbow community that are not out. You might have teens that have not told their parents that they're trans, or may not have just, or they're still trying to figure out if they're asexual or not, or bisexual or not. And so having an opportunity for them to check out materials, print or digital, on their own without fear of embarrassment, fear of judgment, provides an opportunity for them to kind of explore and think about who they are. Having a self-checkout machine can lead to accessibility in this particular matter. If you have a self-checkout machine, patrons can check out their own materials and not have to worry about the librarian looking and just observing what materials are being checked out. Same thing with that discretion when you're helping patrons locate materials. You can help them find, show them which particular materials are, but then walk away and let them, let rainbow families have an opportunity then to look at the materials. Thinking too about what other practices your library has. One library that I worked at when I was in Alabama was when we had somebody put a book on hold. Let's say Christine put a book on hold. Then we would call Christine and leave a message. And we call the number that she had on her patron record. And we'd say, hey, Christine, by the way, the book that you have available, put on hold. And then we would say the title of the book. We would say it's available for you to pick up. Well, having a recording like that is not confidentiality of patron records. It might actually out Christine. It may, Christine maybe have checked out a book that they wanted to explore themselves, and that why the library, having now said the name of that book on the answer machine, has now violated confidentiality of patron records. So just think about, just in your general practices in the library, things that you do that might be creating unwelcoming environments, or maybe inadvertently violating confidentiality or discretion of patron records. The ability to find materials, the ability to find rainbow materials is extremely important. One thing that I have found as I have written about rainbow family children's books particularly, and when I've been looking for new books to add, to papers that I'm writing or books that I'm writing, it is difficult sometimes to find books with rainbow family characters with the information identified in the MARC record, or the information identified in the description of the book in the library's catalog. Oftentimes, you have to go out to a website that is specifically dedicated to Rainbow Kids Lit to even know that a book might have rainbow characters in it, and then go back to your library and then try to find the book. And what's becoming increasingly much more common now, as a lot of picture books now are including lots of types of family diversity in the illustrations, but they might not be mentioned in the text. So as a librarian, you can go in and edit the MARC record, and you can add keywords, you can tag things and add more information to your MARC records, or you can respectfully request that your cataloger do that, maybe bribe them with chocolate or whatever it is that you can, makes them happy. But you can edit MARC records to make them much more findable for rainbow patrons. And one thing I mentioned here on the screen is Homosaurus. So Homosaurus is this online tool that has controlled vocabulary. It's international controlled vocabulary to use when describing various individuals of the rainbow community. And the great thing about that is if you use controlled, consistent vocabulary, and you do it, consistently through your MARC records, through the books, then when someone is looking for a book, they type in something and it automatically comes up. And if you're using controlled vocabulary, you can write those words down and have them on a list to hand out, or make them available for not even, for this population, but for any population, you can use controlled vocabulary to make it easier for them to find materials. Something else to think about in terms of being able to locate materials. Librarians like spine labels, like stickers. If you look about in the illustration that I have here, there's a book there with a rainbow sticker on them. There's some with pink triangles on them. Some libraries put those symbols on there. The rainbow is meant there to show that it has something to do with rainbow families, perhaps. The pink triangle, I think, is an interesting choice of a symbol because historically the pink triangle was used in Nazi Germany for individuals that were homosexual and that were in the concentration camps. They were forced to wear pink triangles. So putting those on books that just any book that have rainbow characters is, I think, in my opinion, a little bit questionable. But because it could be an example of reclaiming that symbol. I don't have a picture here, but something else that I found whenever I was looking at libraries and how they were serving rainbow families, I found this one library that put the spine label broken homes on their rainbow family materials. So instead of the rainbow or instead of the pink triangles, they had a little sticker that said broken homes on there. Now, why would you have that label on any book in your library? Because if you have the label broken home on there, that sends a message that something's wrong with your home. Something's wrong with your home life, with your family. And the library thinks so too, so much so that we're going to put a big label on this book that's about your culture and say it's broken. So if you're going to do that, what's the point of even having those materials? And what I thought was really interesting in this particular case, I was actually interviewing librarians about how they were serving families, and the librarian didn't see or have a problem with the fact that, that they had this label on their book. They didn't see that as being problematic. So spine labels can help us find materials, but they can also cause problems. And also, too, while they help you or anyone go through the shelves and like, oh, look, there's a rainbow. This must be a book about rainbow families. It also is othering, so that if someone is not out, they're probably not going to pick up that book, because then it says that label on there says this is a book about rainbow families or rainbow community. And so if someone's not out, they may not want to read that book. So just again, thinking about sometimes some things we might do to help our patrons actually might hinder the patrons. Something else to think about is when we put pride displays or do any type of displays, like for a Heritage Month, Pride Month, or for LGBT History Month. Having a display that highlights materials is great. You can highlight the accomplishments of various important LGBTQ plus individuals. However, having those displays might also keep certain patrons that might want to check out those books from checking them out, because they would have to walk over to the display that has this big rainbow on it or a big LGBTQ symbol on it or wording on it, and they may not want to or feel comfortable being able to select those books. So again, just something to think about. When you are selecting books to add to your collection, rainbow books to add to your collections, there are some things to think about, as with any collection that you're developing. First thing to think about is copyright date and authorship. Now, copyright date, as with any subject, is going to influence terminology, labels that are used, how certain things are described, how characters react to a particular situation. So copyright date can significantly influence the message and the ways that rainbow families are depicted in materials. So it's important to evaluate your materials, that especially the older ones, and see what kind of message is being sent about those families. Because even though the book may have positive reviews, it may have received positive reviews back in 1988 because it was the only book available, or of the books that were out there, it was the best of what was there. But it may not be a shining example anymore. So it's important to, just with any collection that you have, to go back and periodically weed and evaluate the materials that you have. Something else to think about, particularly for kids and teen material, is think about how does a youth react when they learn that an important person in their life is LGBTQ plus, and when they themselves are trying to explore or embrace their own identity, their own rainbow identity. Are all the stories that you have about someone angsting or embarrassed by the fact that they might be part of the rainbow community, or that their parents are part of the rainbow community? Because that's not the case for everyone that's in rainbow families. Yes, there are some individuals that are not out, some individuals that are embarrassed by the fact that they have two moms or two dads or a trans parent. But some kids don't have a problem with that at all. Some kids are celebrating and embracing the fact that they have two moms or two dads or trans parents or asexual parents or bisexual parents. Some kids embrace their identity open-hearted first thing without having to be embarrassed by that. So you need to make sure that you have books with multiple perspectives and points of view, as you would with any other population. So, books that have rainbow families don't always need to be problem books, which in the past, that has been one of those things where the kid's always embarrassed or having to explain to somebody else about why their family is the way it is or why they are the way they are. That's not the experience of everyone in rainbow families. So fortunately, more diverse materials are being published now that have diverse perspectives and points of view, and you want to make sure you have those materials in your collection. Something else to think about is how does the narrative present the lives of rainbow characters? Are they presented in a developmentally appropriate and age appropriate ways? And this is particularly important because a lot of books, not all, but there are a lot of books in the rainbow that represent rainbow families that are self-published. Now, granted, if you are in a library, your access to self-published books might, be limited. Usually very few jobbers or distributors of books that you would access in the library have self-published books, but there are a lot of self-published books, and there are books that are self-published that are later then picked up by major publishing houses or larger publishing houses. And sometimes self-published books end up not being age or developmentally appropriate. And this kind of also goes back to copyright date and the way that certain topics and things are explained. Sometimes older materials might teeter on being age appropriate versus more modern materials. But with that said, the ideas of what's development appropriate or not can vary from community to community. So you might read a current book with rainbow families in it and think, oh, this is definitely not a book that's appropriate for kids in my community, where it might be appropriate for kids in another community. So it's important to know your community, but then also have diverse perspectives and points of view available. Thinking about how is gender portrayed, gender diversity, how is that addressed? Are characters considered, and I'm using these words in quotes, weird or strange or abnormal because they break gender norms or because they are doing things that define what society says should be reasonable for someone from a particular gender? Do all your books suggest that there are only two genders? Because there are multiple genders. So you want to make sure that gender diversity it is represented in the materials that you have and positively represented. And just with any selection of books that you're selecting, you want to think of just general criteria for good quality literature. To kind of bring this home, I wanted to show you an example here. Heather Has Two Mommies. It came out a long time ago. When it was first published, it was not the first picture book, but it was one of the only picture books that had a kid's picture book that had two moms in it. So when it was published, many libraries bought a copy of it. You can ask Liza Newman herself. She will tell you this first book was not necessarily a book that was age appropriate for everyone. There were things in there that were addressed that we got really long and really wordy and too really much in description for the preschool audience, particularly for a preschool audience that you're going to, if you were to share this book in story time or something like that. Over the years, Leslie did multiple iterations of that book, multiple adaptations and edits to the book. And eventually, back in 2015, a new version of Heather Has Two Mommies was published, which is completely different from the first book. I mean, there basically still sticks to the fact there's a girl named Heather and she has two mommies, and she's trying to explain to kids at school about how proud she is of her family. But that's kind of where the similarities end. The text is much more kid-friendly. The illustrations are much more kid-friendly. And so while a library might have strayed away from and not wanting to have Heather Has Two Mommies before, the newer because it wasn't age appropriate, the newer version is much more age appropriate. So if you were to do collection development, and let's say you looked in your library catalog, you're like, oh, we already have Heather Has Two Mommies. I don't need to buy the new version. The new version is so much better, so much more age appropriate than the older version. Another example of stereotypes. So this is a book that came out in the 90s called Uncle What Is It Is Coming to Visit. So it's about these two kids who has a gay uncle that's coming. They've never met anyone gay. So they go around their neighborhood asking their friends, well, what do gay people look like? And so they get different opinions from their neighbors. You know, maybe maybe he's a leather daddy. Maybe gay men, they're just like regular muscle men, but they wear dresses. Or maybe they like to parade around in funny costumes, like, and here they make her look like the Chiquita Banana Woman. Or maybe they're a cross between the two. And so these kids are really confused. And so they have all these images in their head, stereotypical images of gay men. And then when the uncle comes to visit, he looks like someone from a J. Crew ad. You know, he's got his polo on, he's got his khakis on, and they're relieved that he looks, quote, normal. Well, would there have been anything wrong if he looked like any of these other images? It didn't change the fact that he still loves them. He's their uncle, that he likes them. But the book is kind of perpetuating the idea that only a certain way of looking is acceptable versus another way of looking. Other things to think about when you're selecting books, maybe for story times that you're going to share with kids. Thinking about, again, how are boys portrayed that are doing traditionally, quote, female activities. They considered sissies if they play with dolls or if they dress up. Are girls shown outdoor and active? If they are shown outdoor and active, are they ridiculed for that? How do you have opportunities for kids to see characters in gender bending roles, like males as nurses or teachers and females as construction workers? Do you see gender non-conforming kids in books, and how are they treated? Are they treated as normal kids, normal, quote, normal kids, the same as anybody else, or are they treated differently? Here on the screen, I put the book Max in the talent show. This is the Max series, is a new book series, came out maybe about 2-3 years ago from Cal Lukoff. And it presents a kid who is trans, and it just presents it in a very matter-of-fact way, in a way that, you know, is very age appropriate. So it's, you know, an example of a good book that you could share. Same thing with this book, My Rainbow. It's about a kid who is who's trans, and they're coming to identify who they are and the way that they want to look, and they want to have long flowing hair. And so it's about the mother trying to find a hairpiece or something that the child can wear on their head. And so both of these books are books that are very sensitive to the topic of gender non-conforming kids, and takes kids' sensibilities into account. And what I like about, particularly like the first one, or the one at the top with My Rainbow, the siblings are very supportive, members of the community are very supportive. So it's not an issues book per se, where the kid is being targeted in their community. Two picture books that I don't recommend, and then there's, you know, I have a long list of books I do recommend and don't recommend, but two that I just wanted to call out to you that you might have access to because they are part of, I think they're published by Capstone. There's a lot of libraries purchased from Capstone. The intent of this series, it's a My Family series, the intent of the series was really to normalize the experiences of families. But in this particular these particular books, the one kid has two dads, one kid has two moms, and there's this kid, this kid here with the red hair is the class photographer. So the kid decides that he wants to take pictures of this, for instance, this girl's family who has two dads, to show everybody what she does at home. So he basically follows her home, spends the night there, takes photos everywhere. And it's just very obtrusive and it's a very hokey situation. All this just to prove that she's, you know, has a family just like everybody else. Same thing with the two moms situation. He follows the girl home, takes pictures of of everything that they're doing, just to prove that, you know, more like, you know, their family's just like everybody else. Well, there are other ways of reinforcing the normalcy of rainbow families than having a class photographer come and photograph every single thing you do, which is kind of creepy if you think about it. So thinking about materials, it's a balancing act in your library. So some libraries may be pressured to have books such as this. So these are two books. One's called God Made Dad and Mom, and the other one is Does God Love Michael's Two Daddies? So both of these books are anti-gay books. They're both books. The one on the left is about how God wants families to be formed, and he wants them to have a mom and a dad, which one particular thing I found interesting about this one is that the family is interracial, which I have not seen other books where it said that God doesn't want interracial families too. So I thought that was really interesting. So that, you know, God's okay with interracial families, but he doesn't like gay families. The book on the right is Does God Love Michael's Two Dads? So it's about this kids in kindergarten who have this friend named Michael who has two dads. And just one day at the table, they're chit-chatting with their parents, and they mention the fact that Michael has two daddies. And so that, does God love Michael's two daddies? Because, we've learned that, a family should have a mom and a dad. And so basically the gist of the story is no, that God does not love Michael's two dads. God wants those two dads to dissolve their family and go off and get married. Well, what happens for Michael? Which dad does he go live with? The book certainly does not address that. The book brings up lots more questions and answers. So some people might ask, do we need to have books like this in the library? If we are having balanced collections, is a balanced book of rainbow families, so you have a book that has two moms, two dads, or has a trans parent, or any other variation of rainbow families. If you have the books with rainbow families in them, what is the balance to that? Is it anti-gay material? And my response to that is no, it's not. The balance to that is all the other books that you have in your library that have heterosexual characters in them. That's the balance to materials with rainbow families, not anti-gay materials. Here I give examples. The book on the top is a real book. The one at the bottom is not a real book, but it goes to show you that, if you were buying anti-gay material, you could easily have a book like that, that if you felt like you need to buy anti-gay materials, you could buy a book like that because you feel like you need to be balancing out your collection. Balancing out your collection is buying materials with heterosexual families, or with other types of family diversity that are not rainbow families. If you are in a community that is, for some reason, you're told by your director that you must buy counter LGBTQ materials, you must buy anti-gay materials. First of all, I don't agree with that. But if you have to, then whatever materials you buy need to pass your collection development policy. They need to be respectful of children's understandings. So they need to be development appropriate. They should not promote propaganda or hate speech. So once you take into account that it shouldn't have any of those things, there currently aren't any kids books or teens books that are anti-gay that meet that criteria. Now, again, I don't think you should be buying anti-gay material in your library to have a balanced collection, but I know that there are some libraries that have told me in the past that they have been told that they have to. So that's just what I have to, my thoughts on that. Invariably, though, you're going to have challenges. If you do have rainbow family materials in your collection, you're going to have challenges. And so what do you do if you have challenges? Fortunately, there are a lot of resources to help you. Just this past year, so May of last year, the ALA Office of Intellectual Freedom, they had a webinar called Ban Books Uncensored. And so it was looking at rainbow stories and gender identity and censorship of those and kind of how to respond to censorships. And so there's a link there to that webinar, but there's also a lot of other resources available. The far right, the American Association of School Librarians has a very wonderful, in-depth toolkit that they created that is defending intellectual freedom for LGBTQ plus materials in school libraries. But there's a lot of great information there that is applicable to public libraries as well. So great free resource, and this is on your handout. Another resource is Defend LGBTQ Stories. So this is created by the National Coalition Against Censorship. And they basically go through the steps of what you need to do to defend defend rainbow stories. Because oftentimes, as we'll talk later when we talk a little bit more about programming, oftentimes diverse books, and particularly books with rainbow families, are the targets of censors. Books that are targets of censors, books that end up on the banned book list, or that people try to keep out of the library, or try to, or remove themselves from the library. Oftentimes they present diverse perspectives and points of view, views that are not held, or they're about people that are not like the person who's complaining about the book. And so too often diverse stories are the ones that are more censored and more banned than any other book. So there's a lot of resources out there to help you think about how, defending intellectual freedom and defending having these books in your library. So where can you find some recommended books? So I've mentioned some things to think about, some books that are not so great, some where to go to defend your books, your collections, but where can you find some recommended books? Fortunately, there are some really great resources out there for children's books and teen books, as well as adult books, but I'm mainly going to focus on kids and teen books. there are some examples here on your screen, but let's go into where exactly can you go to find some great books representing the rainbow communities. One of the best places to go is Rainbow Book List. So Rainbow Book List is a book list that's created every year, usually put out in like January or February. And it is a book of kids books as well as teen books. So really it's kids, tweens, and teen books that have LGBTQIA plus characters in them. And so it's kind of a best books list, but specifically related to representing rainbow people in rainbow families. It is created by the Rainbow Roundtable of the American Library Association. And I don't have it listed here, but the Rainbow Roundtable also creates a list called Over the Rainbow, which is a list of adult books on rainbow topics. The Rainbow Roundtable also gives out the Stonewall Book Award, which they have several different awards, separate categories of the Stonewall Book Award, and they have one category just for children and young adults. So that's always another great place to look for books. Now, granted, out of all the Stonewall Book Awards, there's one combined category of children and young adult usually. So if you're looking for a book for kids or for teens during a specific year, you may not find both, but that's where the Rainbow Book List kind of helps to round that out. Another good place to look, the Association for Library Service to Children, they put out a book list about 2 years ago now called Embracing Gender Identities. And so they have it divided up into books for preschoolers, books for elementary age and middle school that represent characters with diverse gender identities. And they have a little blurb about the books that they recommend. So it's a good place to go if you're looking for adding books like that to your collection. I mentioned Welcoming Schools earlier today. So they have, those great resources with definitions of what various terminology for the rainbow community, but they also have book lists. They have activities that you can do with kids, related to rainbow books. They have a lot of great stuff on their website. So I just threw that up here to bring that to your attention. On this screen on the far right, the Rise, it used to be called the Amelia Bloomer book list. This book list is a book list that's given out by various roundtables of the American Library Association, and it is a feminist book list. So it's a book list with lots of girl power, shows really strong female characters, and so oftentimes you will find a book or two in that list that show girls breaking out of gender-defined roles. And so those types of books can still be books that are appropriate for kids that are and teens that are in rainbow families as they are, thinking about gender roles in society and gender expectations and looking for diverse gender representations. Sometimes you can find books from the Rise list on that are relevant. And so you can see this is for ages birth to 18. So it covers the whole gamut of youth services. The Lambda Literary Award is given out every year. They're called the Lammies, kind of like the Grammys, but Lammies. And they have different categories for those. They have adult fiction, nonfiction. They have a biography. But they also have a category for children and teens. And so again, it's often a combined category, but there is a category there. So it's another place to go and look for books. Now, the difference between this award and some of these other awards that I've mentioned is that the Lammies are not given by librarians, whereas most of the other ones are chosen by librarians or teachers. So you might have someone who's a librarian or a teacher on the Lammies, but most likely it's probably not going to be. It's going to be usually members of the rainbow community, but they may have, be from other disciplines. So doesn't mean that the choices are any, better or worse. It's just, it's a different audience selecting the book. So sometimes you might find different titles that are being recommended. If you're looking for young adult books, YA Pride is a great resource to go to. They have recommendations of all types of YA lit. They have a LGBTQIA plus master list of YA titles. And they're always updating that. So I really like that for looking for YA books. The book the thing on the right, resource on the right is from Canada. And so they give some recommendations on developing LGBTQ plus picture book collections, resources, where to find books, considerations. So more criteria when thinking and evaluating these books. So another good place to go if you're just in collection development. Lee Wind has his blog, I'm Queer and What the Hell Do I Read? He reviews kids and teen books with rainbow content. And he also writes some like longer newsy articles about what's going on in the industry. So it's a great place to go. Common Sense Media. On your handout, I've got 3 different links there for Common Sense Media. This is just a screen capture for their movies with LGBTQ plus characters for teens. They also have a list for family movies and tweens and kids movies with LGBT plus characters. They have book lists that they recommend as well. So just again, another resource to go and check out if you're looking for materials or recommended resources with rainbow content. Some other recommendations for collection development. So I really like on the far right, this is the Queer Comics database. Another great resource like that, this is No Flying, No Tights, but Queer Comics database is distinctly queer, so LGBTQIA plus comics, graphic novels, and they provide reviews of those. And these are all ones, that have members, some type of member from the rainbow community that is one of the characters in the book. And you can go to their website, you can search in their database, you can choose the audience, you can go by genre if you want, and narrow it really down and find some recommendations there. So I appreciate, I'm always looking for great graphic novels. And so this is just one place that you can go if you're looking for ones specifically with rainbow families in them, or rainbow characters. The blog on the left, so Patricia Charles, she is a librarian in New York, and she has a blog where she collects books from around the world that have LGBTQ plus themes. Now, the difference between this one and some of the other resources that I've mentioned, she doesn't necessarily recommend these books. She's just saying, here's what's out there. So here are some books in other languages. Here are some books about bullying. Here are some books about, gay pride or trans people or transphobia or whatever. But she's not saying if they're good or bad. So she's just basically saying, here it is. So then it's up to you to go and check them out and decide whether or not, the book is good or not. So it's a place to go if you're looking just to see what's out there, but then you're going to need to go somewhere else or do your own legwork to find out if it's recommended or not. Some libraries around the United States have things on their websites where they kind of do reader's advisory for different cultural groups. And this can be a way to, particularly now during COVID, when people might not be able to come into the library, either because your library is closed or because they may not be able to get out of their own homes because they're quarantined or whatever. So some libraries provide reader's advisory like this, where they have book lists for, in this case, this is from the Free Library of Philadelphia. They have recommended LGBTQ plus materials for kids, for teens, for adults. And so you can go on their website and play around and find recommended materials. They have that for other communities, other diverse communities as well. It's a great tool, again, for doing reader's advisory from a distance, for providing recommendations from a distance. At the same time, it's important to know your community and who's in your community, and whether or not this is going to just create a hit list of books that then can be the targets of censors. And if it is, just be prepared, be ready. How are you going to respond to people that are going to complain about the LGBTQ books that you have? Not saying you shouldn't have, online resource like this. Online resources are great because it also helps with privacy. If someone's not out or doesn't feel comfortable asking for a book, they can go onto your website and find the books. But just saying, anything you put out on the website, be prepared to respond. You might need to respond to the community. So be ready ahead of time to know how you're going to respond. Just thinking about websites or materials that are online, I wanted to mention this. So this is from Canada. This is created by an organization in Canada, and this is Julian. He's Julian is the first trans puppet that that is out there. These are a series of little clips on YouTube that are created to kind of help introduce children to the concept of gender expression and gender identity from the point of view of a small child. And so they're using puppets to do this. So if you are looking for resources to share with kids about gender identity, gender diversity, or being trans, this might be a resource to go to check out. You might find something useful, or you could use it, as a recommendation that suggest someone go home and watch it. Thinking about making your services go far. So as with any other community, it's so important to have community buy-in from the rainbow community when you're planning programs and services. So you don't want to, with any community, you don't want to spend all your time planning things and creating programs and services and then nobody ever use them. And if the library you work in is in like libraries that I've worked in the past, it's all about statistics and the number of people that come into the library, the number of people that come to a program, the number of people that check out a book. So you want your programs, your collections, your services to be successful. So a great way to do that when working with the Rainbow community is to partner with members of the Rainbow community. Partner with other organizations that in your community that serve Rainbow families or Rainbow youth or other populations of the LGBTQ plus community. You might partner with them to create programs. You might use them to help members of those organizations or individual volunteers that you find to help with recommendations of books, or to create an advisory committee where if you plan to do some type of program that reflects members of the Rainbow community, then have an advisory committee with members of the Rainbow community providing feedback and giving you information and suggestions on ways to make the program more inclusive or more welcoming. Here on the screen, I just mentioned or did a screen capture of from the San Diego Library for Pride Month. They actually had library cards they created just for that month, which obviously is not a cheap thing to do. But I like the fact that they, just to celebrate that they created these cards that that show that the library was supportive of the Rainbow community. The bottom one is from the LGBT Center of Raleigh, North Carolina, and I just threw that up there as just in terms of thinking about doing a partnership, and also thinking about doing a partnership. You don't have to just be community organizations. You can find someone else to partner with, some other organization that may not necessarily specifically be a Rainbow organization, but like a museum. A museum's a great community resource to partner with if you wanted to do something to welcome Rainbow families or serve Rainbow families. So this is an example from Miami. So in June, they had their library, the Children's Museum was celebrating Rainbow Family Day. And so they had a series of activities that celebrated Rainbow families. So I thought this was a great idea. Now, nowhere on the sponsor list does it say that they partnered with the public library, but to me, that would have been like a lost opportunity there. Library would have been the perfect place to partnered with. If you were doing something in celebration of Rainbow families, the library could have created book lists or created bookmarks. You could have set up a kiosk to check out books. You could do story times or something during Rainbow Family Day. If something like that was going on at the museum. So again, that's just to me, that if you find out that some organization is doing something like that, then get on board and see how you can participate. So I mentioned creating an advisory committee. People from the Rainbow community can help you with selecting books to make sure you're selecting books that are culturally sensitive, that are culturally appropriate, that are, and particularly if you're thinking about intersectionality, having Rainbow families or Rainbow characters with disabilities, or Rainbow characters that are also racially or ethnically diverse, then having a diverse advisory board to help you select books can be very useful. They can also give you information about and suggestions about how to plan programs. They can also help you promote your programs, which is great. Anytime you have any type of advisory committee, and this doesn't have to be an official thing that if your library is one of those that you have to get approval for official advisory committees, maybe it's more of an ad hoc group of people that you turn to for input, for your programs, input and advice for planning your programs. And they can help. Even if they do just the smallest thing, helping you recommend a book, I really wouldn't use that book for story time. I might use this one instead. Or this is a great book you should use for teens, for a book discussion group. Even if it's something very small like that, you've got their buy-in because you've asked for their opinion, and they're going to want to help promote your program. There are other ways to make your library welcoming. And so Rainbow Family Collections, my book, I have several recommendations there, as well as several sections of the book where I talk about how to deal with controversy and how to respond to problem patrons. But there's just some other recommendations here about making Rainbow families welcoming, just in terms of the language that you use during story time, thinking about the displays that you have and creating a welcoming space with your posters that you have and the displays that you have, confronting any instances of bullying or teasing that you notice directed particularly towards Rainbow families. And this goes not only for patrons that are attending, but also your library staff and your coworkers. So I give a lot of recommendations there, and you can come back and revisit this PowerPoint and dig into some of those suggestions. In terms of physical things that you can do in your environment, you can always put up posters. that might represent individuals from the LGBTQI plus community. So here I give us some examples of read posters from ALA. So there's Margaret Cho and Rachel Maddow as examples. ALA also has some posters to celebrate GLBT Book Month, which is in June during Pride Month. So just putting up posters like that or having displays like that can create a welcoming environment. Chances are, if you had something like Margaret Cho up there on the wall, the people that need to know she's part of the rainbow community will know. Other people that don't know, they don't know. Also, she's promoting, showing that the library is supportive of Asian Americans. So, you're welcoming multiple audiences by having like a poster of Margaret Cho up there. And so depending on your community, that might be easier to do to create a welcoming environment than maybe having a GLBT Book Month poster on the wall. These resources on the left, I love, but they've gone away. But I encourage you to use the Wayback Machine. And actually on your handout, I give the URL and tell you to use the Wayback Machine. So this is from a Rainbow Family organization in Australia. They have these posters that you can download and put out. So who's in your family? And so they give, descriptions of the family. But I like the illustrations. They're very Todd Parr-esque. So if you're familiar with the Todd Parr books for younger kids, these look like those books. And so just having posters like that around, they have one with animals too. That just kind of, helps show that the library is welcoming of all types of families. They also on that website give some examples of creating more inclusive spaces, as well as ways to introduce concepts of rainbow families with young kids. So again, I got the link and encourage you to use the Wayback Machine in your handout to find those resources. Other resources. So this is on the left is a new resource that just came out last year. Advocates for Youth. They had a resource and they just updated it. So this is how to create safe spaces for LGBTQ youth. And by youth, they're really thinking more like teens. So things that you can do for education, healthcare, and community-based organizations to create welcoming spaces for rainbow teens. So there's a lot of great recommendations there. So I encourage you to check that out. The other resource is best practices for serving rainbow students, which is created by Teaching Tolerance, which they've changed their name now, and they're called Learning for Justice. And I've got this resources on there. So they give you a lot of recommendation there on what you can do to make rainbow students feel welcome. And even if it's in things I mentioned for a school environment, they can also work themselves out and be tweaked for a library environment, public library environment too. So programming. When you're doing programming for rainbow families, it's important to think about the materials that you use, to know your approach, know your community, what's going to work in your community. And can you have a book like I Tell It to Mommies in your story time? Or do you need a book like Families? They have all types of families. And then there's a page in there that mentions, a family with two dads. Or could you never have either one of those? And so you need a book like Oliver Button is a Sissy, or a book that has gender, some type of gender diversity in there, but not a trans child or a trans parent. So it's important to know your community and what's going to work, because the last thing you want to do is plan a rainbow family program and then it never launch because you get so much pushback from your administration or coworkers or from the community, if your library board or whatever. If it just never launches because of all the pushback, then it's not effective. So you may have to start small. You may have to start out with having books like Oliver Button is a Sissy, or books that show gender nonconformity, gender diversity. Then work your way into having books with diverse families and in the text and illustrations. Then work your way over to having A Tale of Two Mommies, or books that overtly representative of rainbow families as the main story. So it's important to know your community. Knowing how to respond to kids. Kids are going to have questions. So how, thinking ahead of time, how are you going to respond when a kid raises their hand and says, "My mom says it's a sin to have two mommies"? Well, all right, that's going to kill story time in 2 seconds. So what are you going to say to that? Kids interrupt story time all the time. Those of you that do story time, you're reading a story about a dog. Kid's going to raise their hand and say, "My dog died." Well, great. Now you've ruined story time. You already have a pat response to that. So think about how are you going to respond to when the kid, has a comment about the fact that the book is about two moms or two dads. You know what to do. So just be prepared ahead of time. Same thing. How are you going to respond to adults if they have a problem? If the caregivers have a problem, or your administration, or your coworkers. So depending on your library, you might be able to do out and proud programming, or what I call under the radar programming. So if it's out and proud, you can do events in conjunction with LGBTQ Pride, You can do things, rainbow family events, depending on your community. There might be rainbow families that have like small get-togethers, like a picnic or something like that. There might be a P-flag meeting, and so you could do, have something that you do there. You might have your library space open and have an adoption workshop that's inclusive of LGBTQ topics. It's adoption workshop in general, but it might be inclusive of LGBTQ topics. You might have a film series that has, that might have, LGBT friendly children, teens, or family films as part of the lineup, or there might be one character in there in the film that is part of the rainbow community. You might do something for rainbow history or pride history program for kids or for teens or whatever. But you might be in a community that doesn't allow that. And so we'll talk about what that might look like. But if you are, and you can do that, you can have rainbow family story time. This is an example of what a university library did in San Francisco. They did a program on dragons, dresses, and ducklings. Oh my. And so that was, they had a book about the sissy duckling, and a book, I think it was 10,000 Dresses. And then there was a book about a dragon that was gay. And so, that was what it was. If you do something in connection with pride, remember that, or think about that there are more flags for the rainbow community than just the regular rainbow flag or the pride flag. So here's the pride flag as it was originally created back in the 1970s. Here's the pride flag, traditional gay pride flag now in the middle, but there's also trans flags, there's also bisexual flags, there's other flags. So if you are trying to think of creating a welcoming space through bold displays or through programming, be sure to include all members of the community and make sure you have flags that represent them as well. And it's not necessarily hard to find those. Last year, Target had them in their dollar bin stuff. Like when you first go into Target, right there in the dollar bin, they had all this, the tchotchkes for different things, and they had stuff for pride, and they had, trans pride flags and bisexual pride flags. And I guarantee if we had them in Alabama, you probably had it in South Carolina too. So the link I have here takes you to an article in the Advocate. You can find other information online, but I take you to an article in the Advocate that looks at different pride flags and gives a history of those. So if you need a place to start. But you may be in a place where you can't do out and out programming. So maybe inclusive programming works. So inclusive programming is great because maybe you can't do rainbow family story time because it just won't work for your community. You don't want to embarrass your rainbow families, or you don't want your program to be perceived for being for only one specific population. So having inclusive programming where you include rainbow materials throughout the year or throughout storytime regularly helps to normalize those experiences of kids and adults and teens in those families, provides a window for kids outside those rainbow families to see themselves represented. And it also kind of subverts the idea that storytime is only for one type of family. Other ways to be inclusive in programming, just think about the language that you use. Use terms like parent, caregiver, or your adult instead of mother or father. Also think about sharing books, with family diversity, sharing gender bending books. Think about the guest speakers that you have. Make sure you have lots of diversity in the guest speakers that you have. If you are in a community where you can't have rainbow family books, you can make books more inclusive by changing the pronouns of the characters as you're reading a story, or changing names so they become more androgynous. Use names like Jamie or Jaime if it's in Spanish, Renee, Michelle, Pat, Chris. Just changing names to that, one of the characters' names to that, can really kind of change the way the story is perceived. One thing that I really like to do is to start a book or start a story and allow kids to conclude the ending by inserting their own personal experiences. Via written or oral or visual. And that way it provides the opportunity for kids to read in their experiences if your library doesn't allow you to have kind of out and proud programming. If you're doing something for teens, there's a lot of options. Here I give some recommendations. Particularly for South Carolina, I recommended having an author event with Greg Howard. So if you notice this book on the right, Middle School's a Drag, You Better Work, that's by Greg Howard. He's a South Carolina native. The book is about a tween in North Charleston, he's an entrepreneur, and he is going to help the tweens in his middle school be successful at doing different things. And so he decides to run a talent agency, and one of the people that he takes on in his talent agency is a student who is a drag tween. And so it's the story is about, but the main character, he's also, the 12-year-old is also coming to terms with the fact that he's gay as well. So, you know, having a book discussion with Greg Howard, be it a virtual one or a live one, you know, can bring in someone local or someone that was local. He lives in Nashville now, so he's still fairly local. You might partner with, you know, school organizations that have gay straight alliances or other nonprofits. I know for you guys, there's a place in North Carolina that has like a youth center. Here I did a screen capture. We have the Magic City Acceptance Center in Birmingham, but you know, some organization that serves LGBTQ youth, you could do a partnership with them. You could do a LGBT prom or an anti-prom. You could do an LGBTQ or rainbow YA band book event, or rainbow inclusive book club, or make sure you do rainbow friendly displays. I know libraries that have done teen drag queen maker spaces. So basically you have the teen drag queens making their own costumes. So it's a maker space thing where everybody brings, you know, you bring out clothes and they sew up and do what they want to do. You can do something for Trans Awareness Week or Trans Awareness Month, which is in November. You can do something for Queer Comic Con. You can have a Queer Comic Con where you highlight some of the, you know, books that are out there that have queer characters, or do a regular Comic Con, but then make sure you include books that have LGBTQIA+ characters in them. Here's an example from kind of closest to you. This is in North Carolina. There is the LGBT Center in Raleigh. They have different programs. So they have a Queer YA book club. They have a youth and family program. They have a youth drop-in, youth junior drop-in. So any number of those are something that you could partner with if you were a librarian that, you know, were close to them, or if, you know, there was an organization close to you in your community that did something similar like that. There are opportunities, you know, for partnerships. I know here in Alabama, our Magic City Acceptance Center, they were having a Queer YA book club. They never thought to partner with the library. Well, I knew the librarian, I knew the person at the Magic City Acceptance Center. I'm like, well, why don't you guys work together? Because I knew the librarian was very supportive of queer teens, but he had never had an opportunity to really launch anything at the library. So I introduced them to each other, and they partnered together on a very successful book club. Here's some other, just some examples there of a youth discussion group or a pride prom. If you're thinking about adults and rainbow families, things that you could do an author event. There's a program called LGBT Books to Prisoners, which you could think about in terms of rainbow families. This might be prisoners that are maybe some of the caregivers of some of the kids in rainbow families that you serve. Having pride books, rainbow books in homeless shelters. Again, thinking of friendly and inclusive displays, even in the adult department. Inclusive book clubs, something with pride events, having a writer's workshop that's inclusive of rainbow families. For Trans Awareness Week, here's just, you know, there's a poster that you can download. No Brow created this one a few years ago as a publisher, created them. Glisten, which is on your handout. They have some things on their website related to things that the library can do or classrooms can do related to celebrating Trans Awareness Week. You can also celebrate Trans Awareness Month, which is also in November. And so then I just threw some different books up there with trans characters in them that, you know, that you might be able to do if you wanted to do some type of programming with that. In February, this past year, and I know the year before that, they did the same thing, Jazz and Friends. So this was sponsored by the American Association of School Librarians, National Education Association, and Welcoming Schools through and Human Rights Campaign, you know, through the Welcoming Schools. And this is an opportunity. They have a read-in in February to celebrate trans kids books, trans kids picture books. And that specific date is chosen because in Wisconsin, a few years back in February, there was a young trans girl who was bullied in her community, you know, stood up and rallied around her and, you know, supported her. And so now this is held every year in honor of that. So ALA works with NEA and Welcoming Schools to support that. You could also do some of the Rainbow Family Day or Rainbow Family International Day of Families, International Family Equality Day. So this is International Family Equality Day. There's posters for that online, International Day of Families. You can find information about that on your handouts. That's just a day to celebrate family diversity in general in May. And so that's an opportunity to include rainbow families in programming, you know, that you might already do. And so there's a lot of resources available on the handouts and online. If you just dig around and look up International Family Day of Equality or International Family Day, or you can, if you are in a community where you can do it, you could even, you know, tweak that more and celebrate International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia, and there are resources for that. Your handout also gives resources for specific months and which you can do throughout the year for specific portions of the rainbow community. Here I mentioned Allie the Ally. Allie the Ally is kind of like Flat Stanley, if you know the character from the kids' book, Flat Stanley. Flat Stanley was this little flat person that was character that was mailed around to different places. And so he got to visit different places. Well, with Allie the Ally, she's kind of like Flat Stanley. You can print her out. You can have your teens or kids taking pictures of her different places that they go with Flat Stanley, or I'm sorry, Allie the Ally, as they would with Flat Stanley. Or if you have an event that you're doing. So here's John Green down there holding up Allie the Ally to show that the library is, this event is inclusive, it's welcoming. And so you could do something, with that, just having that on the promotional flyers at the bottom, just being sure to credit the group of teens that created it, created Allie. Drag queen story times. Now I'm keeping an eye on the time because I want to make sure you have time to ask questions. But I wanted to bring in drag queen story times because I do know that some libraries, when they think about serving rainbow families, they think about creating drag queen story times. Drag queen story times can be very polarizing, as you can just see from the headlines here. Some people do not like them, and I know that even in South Carolina, there was a librarian who lost their job for related to a drag queen story time. So drag queen story times can be very polarizing. Some people think it's promoting promiscuity, it's bringing in pedophiles into the library. That is not the case at all. Drag queen story times, that point is to celebrate gender diversity, celebrate creativity, celebrate different ways of just being you. So Judy Zuckerman, here's in this quote here, this is from the Drag Queen Story Hour website. She just talks about how drag queen story time really allows kids to think about gender stereotypes and to really kind of break through and look beyond gender stereotypes, and it gives an opportunity to talk about bullying, and it really creates an opportunity to just look at different ways of being your true unique self. So if you were planning a drag queen story times, there's you might want to partner with an organization. Partnering with a rainbow family organization is a great way to get buy-in. You want to be sure you select the appropriate books. There are recommendations for books on your handout as well. You can find things recommended online. You can do things for drag queen storytime that's specifically weighted to just gender diversity in general, dressing up in general, or something very specific to being rainbow families, or even to trans characters. Or there's the the hips on the drag queen go swish swish swish, which is very much a drag queen book about drag queens, sung to the tune of like the wheels on the bus. But whenever you plan any type of program, whatever it is, you want to make sure you have administrator support. So you want to try to get administrator support if you're planning a drag queen story time. You want to, again, like with rainbow family programming, think about how you're going to respond to the community and parents that might have problems. How are you going to advertise these programs? Thinking about your trainer, your performers, the clothing that they wear. You might want to have a conversation about child-appropriate clothing and child-friendly names, because some drag queens may not have child-friendly names. They have names that were created for adult humor. Make sure you also look and make sure they're not on a sexual offender registry. You should do that for any programming that you do, but you should definitely do it for programming that's going to be controversial. You want to make sure you check out your presenters and make sure that they are legitimate, that they're not a felon, that they work with kids, that they want to work with kids. I did an article that I give reference to on your handout. I wrote an article where I interviewed libraries planning drag queen story times, and it was really interesting the wide range of planning that went into it. Some libraries were very intentional and they did the research and did what they needed to do. Other libraries, they're like, oh, let's do this. And they went down to the local, gay bar, found a drag queen, brought her in, and they did drag queen story time, and it was a huge mess. So, it's important to, just like with any program, to plan, validate your trainers, do what you need, or your performers, train your performers, and do your work ahead of time. There are resources to help you if you want to have to respond to drag queen story time. Because if someone has a problem, there are resources available on how to respond. I've got some available on your handout. If you go to Intellectual Freedom blog of ALA, you can just search drag queen, and they have different sources there. And I have some other resources. But then there's also general resources available from ALA about the politics of planning diverse programs, and how to respond to complaints. And I love this quote here. This is from a news article a few years back. That basically says that the library is a storehouse of controversy, because if you're doing your job as a library, you're promoting all cultures, you're promoting everyone. And so you're providing an opportunity for people to learn about all different types of experiences. And so most likely you're going to tick somebody off, and yet that's going to happen in programming if you're doing your job right. So ALA has created an interpretation of the Library Bill of Rights related to just doing programming and displays as a resource and how you serve diverse populations. They have a list of ways that you can respond if you have complaints. To a drag queen story, a list of resources there just on their website. So I've got that in your handout. And then there's other resources on your handout specifically from ALA too that relate to responding to complaints. So I'm going to end with this. Mother's Day is coming up. Think about if you do anything for Mother's Day or any other type of day, how do you, just think about, you may not be creating a welcoming environment. So this is a little girl, she's drawing her, or a child, we don't even know if it's a girl. It's a child drawing a cartoon picture, says Happy Mother's Day, S apostrophe, and the teacher or librarian, whoever it is, comes up and is pointing at the paper, trying to say that the apostrophe is in the wrong place. And she's like, I have two mommies, I know where the apostrophe goes. So, sometimes whenever the programming that we do, we can be exclusive of families. So do we call it Mother's Day? Mother's Day? Do we call it Family Day? Or do we include books in Mother's Day programming about single parents that you can read in your own experience? Or do you include books where there are two dads? Stella brings the families about a girl who has two dads. And so there's a Mother's Day celebration in her school. And she's really anxious and worried because she has two dads, not a mom. And so she's angsting about whether she can bring her two dads or not. And so these are quotes here from the HuffPost where folks talk about how they have now navigated Mother's Day because there are no mothers in their family. And so some of them call it Parents' Day, or some call it Family Day. Some of them, do something a little bit different and tweak it to make it more what works for their family. All right, I know I've been talking for a while and you might have questions. So questions, what questions do you have? Feel free to put them in the chat box and I'll try to answer them.
And I've not seen any questions come in yet, but we'll see if they're typing.
And I know I throw a lot at you. So I encourage you to go back and look at the handout. There's a lot of great stuff in the handout I didn't even mention. So check those out.
And if you're in the audience, you can also unmute yourself if you'd rather ask your question. I really appreciate the presentation. I know I personally made note of a lot of resources that I'll be coming back to as well. I had one question, if no one in the audience has, for a library that may have just up until now avoided anything to do with rainbow families or LGBTQ topics because of probably fears of resistance, not being supported, or even protests and things like that can happen. What would you recommend for a first step to take to get started?
I think my first step I would do is, I think the easiest first step is if you get a family book display and to include books with rainbow families in it. Or there, like I said, there's a lot more picture books now coming available that have two moms, two dads in the illustrations, but not in the text of the book. So reading books like that, can be a first place to start, because you're starting to, introduce diverse families in the illustrations, and kids might pick up on that and they might not, but then, it creates the welcoming space for rainbow family members, but then, it might open up an opportunity for conversation. And so if it's a child instigated conversation, that's different than you as an adult bringing it up. So that could be the first place to start.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions from the audience?
I do have a question, and I guess a lot of this can be, so a lot of what you shared today is great. I think there are many opportunities for public libraries to do this programming. What do you suggest, other than like welcoming schools? What resources are out there for school librarians, particularly in the elementary schools? What suggestions do you have for them? I think a lot of what you talked about can be applied in elementary school libraries for sure, but anything in particular The AASL toolkit for sure, yeah.
The AASL toolkit is specifically just for school librarians. So it actually talks about, it ties it to the standards, the AASL standards. So that's a great place to go. But then I also thought about GLSEN. GLSEN is an educator network. So even though I'm kind of saying, you know, libraries can take a lot from it, it is an educator network. So it would be even more relevant for school librarians than it would be for public librarians. I know the school that I worked in, though, it was not exactly gay friendly. So I never could have rainbow family books in there. So what I did was I had books that had gender non-conforming characters in them. Like I would have Sissy Duckling, that, you know, or something like that in my on display, but I wouldn't necessarily read books with rainbow families in them because it wouldn't have worked in the school that I was in. Now with all the books that have illustrations with rainbow families in them, but they're not in the text, then I would have those books for sure and have those on display and I would read those.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And lots of good comments on the chat. I think this webinar was very helpful for all of us. And I believe we're at 3:30. So thank you again for being here today. And thank you, Jamie, for being our presenter. We learned a lot.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And y'all all have a great day. And again, thank you for inviting me.